Welcome to today's webinar. Today's webinar complements our quarterly series of presentations in which we aim to provide you with customer testimonials, new features, and expert insights into current or important topics related to SAP security. If you missed one earlier episode, that's not a problem because you can still watch them as a recording online on securitybridge.com/events. By the way, our team also shares important information all about the topic SAP security in our SecurityBridge LinkedIn channel. So if you don't want to miss any important information, I would definitely recommend you to follow our channel. Before we get started, allow me to introduce you about the session's procedure. The session will be recorded and all our participants will be muted automatically. Sessions can be asked in the chat directly to the moderator. We'll read them out in the end of the session, so we'll have a dedicated spot for that. I guess many of our guests today know that queasy feeling, that uncomfortable feeling if the next audit is due or the auditors are around. Of course, me and my team, we ensure that all the known regulations are respected and compliance exists and regular checks ensure that we keep the compliance. However, what if there is no specification or rule existing for such an area? Could the auditor then still check this area? For SAP customers, this seems to be a repeating pattern. From audit to audit, new functional areas are checked by the auditors. In today's sessions, we will elaborate on the reasons for the situation. For that, I'd like to welcome our guest, Carsten Crantz, Director at PwC Germany. Hi, Carsten.
Hi, Christoph. Good afternoon, everyone. Happy to be here.
We are glad to have you in the session, Carsten. And by the way, my name is Christoph Nagy. Besides being your host, I'm also Managing Director of SecurityBridge. Now, before we get into the session, let's have a look at our agenda for today. To kickstart, we put focus on the situation caused by the governance gap and its impact on SAP security. You will learn what it means and what is needed to switch from a reactive approach to a more proactive one. This will not only help you to improve the SAP security posture, it may also help you to reduce the level of stress before an audit. Well, we will also speak about the challenges and a solution strategy. And at the end, as I already said, we will have some time to answer all your questions. As a reminder, please submit them in the chat panel to the moderators. Now, let's jump right into it. Carsten, what is meant by governance gap and what's the situation for SAP customers according to your experience?
Well, that is a good starting point. And to understand this, we need to understand that compliance or governance cannot go without security. And for SAP systems, it means that without any security, we can hardly say that the system is actually compliant. And compliance in this topic, in this regard, is not only about being ready for the next audit, but it's also being ready for the day-to-day risks within such an SAP environment. Meaning, an SAP landscape can hardly be compliant if there is no confidentiality, integrity, availability ensured. And this leads us to the governance perspective. As you probably all know, there are a multitude of standards dealing with information security or information security management around. Just as a few examples, the ISO 27 series or the NIST frameworks all of that valuable, and they have their place in providing a framework for establishing security in an organization. However, SAP is a highly complex environment, and I say environment because it's not only an application, it consists of several components, and the entire application is highly customizable, meaning it can be individualized, and it usually is. No one ever implemented an SAP system off the shelf as a standard product, and thus it cannot come with appropriate security by default. More, it needs to be customized also in terms of security. It needs to be considered that security settings are important in an SAP environment. And those standards, those aforementioned standards, do not provide that level of detail for an SAP application that allows to actually do the right settings. So there is the need for further additions. An organization needs to put some work into it in defining security requirements from a risk perspective, in defining security settings and defining security measures in order to provide an overall security for their SAP systems. So if only for example, ISO 27001 standard is implemented on a very high level basis as a framework without considering the necessary details for an SAP application, then this is hardly enough to give everyone in an organization clear instructions and a clear guideline on what needs to be implemented. And this is usually one part of the governance gap, this distance between the high-level framework standards and the actual security settings in terms of implementing them and in terms of monitoring them on a standardized basis.
That's really interesting. But now, by your experience, which security standard do you feel is the best to cover SAP security?
That is actually hard to say. Every of those standards has its advantages and its strengths, but they have all in common that they don't go into that level of detail that is needed to actually control the environment. The SAP itself, for example, aligns their security products to the NIST standard, which is absolutely reasonable, but nevertheless for implementing security for SAP systems in an organization, it is every of those standards needs to have some addendums, some additional work in order to break it down to the SAP level.
I see. And just out of curiosity, because we see that that person here with the SAP basis admin logo on the T-shirt, who is typically responsible for SAP security in an average organization? What would you say, or who is needed to cover all this?
We see this SAP basis admin, but we also see that he is kind of that he has a question mark, and rightfully so, because we in our daily practice in supporting organizations with SAP security, we usually see the responsibility for securing the SAP landscapes completely delegated to the IT department or to the SAP basis admins. They play an important role, but they are not the only party. And this leads us to the second dimension of the governance gap. Which is communicating between all involved parties and all involved stakeholders. And we see it on this slide that there is not only the SAP operations where the SAP basis admin would usually belong to, there are also business departments, because the business departments in the end are those using the SAP system. So they are basically the only ones to derive the respective risk that can occur from a security incident for the SAP environment in terms of euros, in terms of money, and in terms of justifying the expenditure for SAP security measures. And there's usually also an information security department which covers more than only SAP. It covers the information security for the entire organization. They also should have a word in designing SAP security measures. And in some cases, there's also a separate IT department responsible, for example, for the infrastructure, for the networks, and they also need to be taken into account in order to ensure that the security measures planned and the security requirements documented actually integrate into the overall IT architecture and into the overall IT landscape. And in our daily business, we often see that those parties that should be involved and that should work together in order to derive security requirements, in order to develop security measures, that they don't communicate at a level that is needed to implement sustainable SAP security. So there is hardly any internal communication, leaving aside standardized communication between those parties, and this makes it especially hard to derive risk-oriented measures, because in a mature SAP security environment, the security measures should be derived and should be justified against the respective security risks for the business, because this is not for the purpose of itself, the security measures. It's to reduce the risk for the overall business, and this also helps to implement continuous and sustainable security measures. And in addition, it also helps to derive which roles and responsibilities for security in SAP environments need to be in place, and which responsibilities can be outsourced. So it gives us also an overview over the necessary expertise for security. And this enables us to follow a trend to proactive more than ad hoc security that we lined out on the following slide. Because also we see on many in many organizations that there is more or less an ad hoc security for SAP, which is purely reactive. It purely reacts to maybe some audit findings from the last audit, but not even from the audit before. This also then is the effect. There's also an effect for the implementation, for the design implementation of security measures, because the security measures in those cases usually are developed by individuals and depend highly on the expertise and on the opinion and the market overview, for example, of the technical individual who's responsible for operating security in the SAP system. And as we mentioned before, the SAP basis admin, for example. But this does not help us to achieve actually sustainable security. Sustainable security, on the other hand, is an overall organizational responsibility. So everyone involved, every stakeholder needs to talk to each other, and risks need to be identified. The risk, if a security incident happens, what would that mean to my business, to my production facilities, to my logistic capabilities, whatever. And from this point, and this can usually be put into a monetarized risk approach, much easier than abstract technical incidents. And from this risk, it's easier to derive security requirements to determine how important is my SAP environment for the organization. And on the other hand, to justify each spending into security measures. And let's not kid ourselves. Security is a cost element. So every expenditure for security measures needs to be justified against the risk and the risk reduction that comes along with it. And the last point for sustainable security means that there is not only an ad hoc reporting or an ad hoc audit answer for how well are we prepared for security, but it's more a standardized reporting and a standardized preparation to prove compliance and to prove the level of security, not only to auditors, but also to business departments and to the organization's management. So summarizing the major challenge on the following slide, it mainly consists of three. It mainly goes back to the fact that security in SAP systems is highly complex, because SAP systems itself are highly complex, and the level of customizing that is possible does not necessarily contribute to a standard security for SAP systems. And this is not because SAP is a bad product, but because it is so highly customizable. So, and every configuration change that is security relevant can be a potential vulnerability, that may lead to a security incident. And for that reason, it is necessary to clearly define which security requirements the organization has for their SAP systems based on the business risks associated with it, and which measures, for example, parameter customizing, are necessary to address those risks. So those security requirements need to be derived from a risk perspective. They need to be documented in order to be clearly accessible to everyone who is responsible for implementing it. And for a mature organization and for sustainable security in SAP systems, it is necessary to also monitor them on a regular basis. And on a regular basis does not mean once a year when an audit is due, but it means on a continuous basis the security settings, the fulfillment of security requirements needs to be monitored, needs to be able to report it on, and any change that may be security relevant needs to be detected, needs to be investigated, and needs to be justified. And especially for the latter part, for the continuous monitoring, it is obvious that this can be a manual task, but in my personal opinion, a manual task is not necessarily neither the most efficient nor the most effective way to monitor the fulfillment of security requirements on a technical basis. So probably in some cases, or in many cases, it might be very considerable to do this in an automated manner. And talking about an automated manner, that is probably more your playing field, Christoph, than mine.
Perfect transition. Thanks, Carsten. That was very insightful, by the way. I think we learned a lot already, and I expect a ton of questions already from the audience in the question and answers part. Now, exactly as you said, this is it's our duty to help with automation, and that's also the reason why PwC and SecurityBridge are working together to help customers with that situation. Because as you just learned, it's on the one hand side building the for you tailored security requirement -baseline. Maybe if you want to expand this, the development guideline and so on, because it's SAP security is obviously a wide field. But then on the other side is the continuous monitoring is still a challenge, and that's where SecurityBridge comes into the play, and where we really work together. So we combine a smart solution with an intelligent consulting approach that allows us to increase the security of your SAP environment, and that's without sacrificing your valuable manpower, your valuable resources, because as Carsten said, security is considered a cost. I wouldn't deny that. On the other side, what is the cost of neglecting security? So you need to also look into that. Of course, now a key component in that approach is an automated and computerized verification of guidelines, as well as a normalized visualization of the enterprise risk on dashboards and reporting that is also accepted by the auditors. And here we're going into our demo for today, because nothing speaks more than actually showing what the automation can bring to you and what we mean what we just explained. Now, SecurityBridge enhances the flagship products of SAP, like NetWeaver, S/4HANA. It works with ABAP, Java, HANA-only systems. It ships security and monitoring features for various SAP cloud applications, such as the business technology platform. Just to illustrate this, you see here the connections and the individual agents, like we have ABAP agents, Java agents. Carsten mentioned network security, which is also a very important aspect of the overall security. We collaborate with Fortinet, and we even source real-time information from network artifacts like the next generation firewall, FortiGate. We also have agents to cloud connect the sub router and even the new business technology platform. And by the way, the solution works on-premise, obviously, but it also works for any sort of hyperscaler hosting, including HANA Enterprise Cloud, and it's even certified and compliant with RISE with SAP. However, today we are focusing mainly on the security and compliance monitor, and besides, SecurityBridge platform provides a whole lot of other functions like real-time monitoring, patch management, interface traffic maps, and so on. But today we'll need to stay sharp on the security and compliance monitor. The security and compliance monitor shows you the results of the checks that are included in the various baselines. Exactly, we support multiple baselines, and we also ship standard baselines based on the German user group or the SAP recommendation. But of course, you can also copy and customize those baselines, and you can also build baselines with a different intention, for instance, to validate against certain industry-specific regulations. Maybe one that is provided from SWIFT, for instance. I recently learned that the payment network SWIFT also has a security guideline, a security framework that it asks their customers to adhere to. And obviously there is an impact to SAP too if you're doing SAP payments. So as I said, we ship a standard baseline that can be copied and customized. Next to the baselines, the solution also provides a mapping of controls to existing cybersecurity frameworks. And we already heard about that, ISO 27001 or NIST, and I'm just illustrating this here in the demo. So you can choose your preferred cybersecurity framework and then choose the controls that you want to filter on, and then apply a filter, and you will see the results have been shrunken, has been reduced here. That means that every compliance check that we have in SecurityBridge is mapped to a framework. And of course, we are continuously extending this mapping to new frameworks, but also allow customers to create their own mapping to reflect individual frameworks whatsoever. Now, this is very convenient because every check against the baseline can be just triggered with a button's click from the UI. So for instance, I'm checking against my production baseline and I'm just executing a check here for all my systems. And now a background job has been scheduled that will execute this. For convenience reasons, we'll also bring this to you in a central scheduler that allows you to monitor what's ongoing in your environment and even going into the individual results and the job log. So you don't need to even leave the UI of SecurityBridge to have full control over your environment. Very important is, but also the results that are created from SecurityBridge. Now let's stick with the production baseline here. And for instance, as an example, take the A1 instance that is a part of the ABEX 750 landscape. This is a free name to choose for every customer in the setup. Now what we see here is a multitude of information. One is how many checks has been executed and how many of them have been coming back with an end or near state, how many of them are with warning. We also see a trend indication, which means that compared to the prior check will have increased or decreased our security standards. We'll also have a 5-star rating system, as you expected from a state-of-the-art product. But more important, on the right-hand side, you see security levels that indicate the maturity of your individual security based on responsibilities. So we are separating our checks in authorization, data protection, and so on. There are quite some more actually. If we switch, for instance, into the standard baseline, we'll see identity and access management, for instance, there. We also benchmark against the best configured system in the environment as indicated by that line here. Of course, we can also go a level deeper, for instance, look into the individual results. And very important here is you can build your own baseline based on your requirements. SecurityBridge is even as versatile that you can build entire new and tailored compliance checks based on checking authorization, checking system parameters, and so forth. When you have it here and when you have your results here, you will always find a risk description and a direct link into our knowledge base. And of course, this goes even further. You see, every compliance check that we have here in that category is classified with an exploitation risk and a so-called resolution complexity category. And that can be used to build, for instance, a resolution roadmap. And our partners will help you to guide you through building the best roadmap that fits your requirement based on your individual baseline to actually increase your security posture with SecurityBridge. Good. Let's wrap up the demonstration here and go back into the session slide deck. Now, SecurityBridge platform comes, as I said, with much more. We also have threat detection. We have custom code vulnerability analysis that integrates with ATC. We have security patch management that highlights every missing security patch for your individual installation at a button's click. And this is only to name a few capabilities. If you're interested to see a full demo, we're happy to run an individual session upon request. Maybe this is a good moment to again mention that previous sessions of our webinar series, of our quarterly webinar series are still available on our website. Now, I think it's time for the questions. Oh, I should have mentioned we are SAP certified, and as you can see, it runs for S/4HANA Cloud, Private Edition, works with RISE, and so on. And it's even available on the App Store. Now it's time for questions. Let me see what we have here. Don't be shy. Good. We have one question here from Thomas, if I see the name right. I think that's for you, Carsten. How do you start typically the identification of a governance gap in an organization?
That's a good question. Typically there are two options to start it. One would be not starting with the governance and with the organizational structure at all, but with assessing the technical setup and the respective parameters of an SAP landscape. Usually this provides some insight for results on deficiencies within the existing landscape. And from this starting point, from this more technical starting point, you can very well derive potential organizational or governance deficiencies, because I usually think that for every technical deficiency, there is an organizational root cause. No one builds in technical deficiencies by default or willingly, but this usually is an indicator for something in the governance or in the detailed requirements not being appropriate or not being on a level of detail that is sufficient for implementation. This would be one way, deriving the governance quality or the governance maturity from the technical setup. The other way would be starting from the top down. Speaking of top down, we usually consider the organizational governance part at the top of every organization and at the top of every framework. So assessing in details the necessary policies, guidelines, documentations, organizational precautions, and what I showed you earlier, the collaboration of different stakeholders within an organization to identify the security risk from SAP systems and to derive the necessary security measures. This would be the other way, and this is usually more effective starting this way, because it leads to more insights, and after remediating those deficiencies, it usually leads to a better and a more sustainable security for one reason. If I only analyze the technical security settings, they can be good by accident, provocatively said. That does not necessarily mean that they are still good in 3 months, in 6 months, in 1 year. If there is no sufficient governance and no sufficient guideline or framework for SAP security that ensures sustainability. So to provide the overall picture and to provide an actual sustainable SAP environment for the future, I would highly recommend to assess the organization and the governance structures combined but independently from the technical settings.
Interesting. I think you answered the question very well. I do get a lot more questions here. I have one here from Lukas, and I assume that goes in my direction. I'll read it out. Can you elaborate a bit more about violation management, which is on the roadmap for 2023? Is it similar to an SAP product? Luca, please, you're obviously a SecurityBridge customer. Violation management is something that is not yet publicly announced. I can tell you, we will prepone what we promise on our roadmap, and it would be a very interesting feature for all our customers and also the SAP community. I cannot yet speak about it. Please accept my apologize for that. We will have a dedicated session on that. Stay tuned. Please follow our channels and then subscribe to the sessions. We also have more questions from you coming. This question is, I think, is your strategy direction going into ERP security, or do you want to also only cover SAP security? We are definitely all focused on SAP security. I can't answer that question for Carsten, if Carsten also provides generic advice besides SAP security. Maybe, Carsten, you want to answer that question yourself. Do you also provide consulting for general ERPs other than SAP?
Absolutely. So SAP is a very prominent ERP systems, but nevertheless, it's not the only one in the market. And as a company like PwC, we obviously need to be able to consult in security not only on SAP systems but on other ERP systems as well.
Yeah. Then we have a question from Sonia here. Can you show shortly how the Swift CSP framework is integrated in SecurityBridge? That's a good one. I think based on the time, I cannot do that right now, but it will be similar to as I showed you in the demonstration. So you can then filter all the compliance checks that are existing based on the Swift CSP, and then you'll only find the compliance results for this particular framework. Good. And then we have here another question that I think is best answered by you, Carsten. I think it deals with enterprise risk. Doesn't every SAP customer know how important SAP is and how important SAP security is? I think that links to what you said in the beginning with a monetary impact.
Actually, it does. And does every customer know, or every organization know the security risk? Instinctively, probably. Probably everyone, every organization using SAP knows that SAP is an important part of the internal application infrastructure and supports important business processes. However, it is not necessarily acted upon, and this may have various reasons. So whenever we see SAP systems which support a core part of the business operations, it does not necessarily mean that they are appropriately safeguarded, and this may be rooted in a lack of governance or in a lack of structured thought spent into actually deriving the security requirements or actually identifying the risk. And by identifying the risk, I do not only mean, okay, we cannot work anymore if our SAP system is down. This is a very, very low level of maturity for a risk assessment, but it means exactly what you just mentioned, Christoph. It means putting a dollars or a euro value to the actual risk in order to then be able to justify against this risk every security spending. So summarizing, probably everyone, every organization is aware that SAP is one of the more important systems when it comes to security. However, how this knowledge is handled is quite different.
Yeah, to extend on that answer, I think there is quite an awakening on the market, and more organizations are ready for application security. And well, if you cover all the traditional security aspects, the next question is, where are my critical enterprise applications? And for SAP customers, I bet SAP applications are on the top 10, if not on the top 3 on that risk list, and then the requirement arises. So yes, definitely customers are aware of that. And I would say due to the complexity, we also in the past saw certain reactions that caused us to believe that it was neglected because of the complexity and the big task. I can tell you with SecurityBridge and with a good service partner, you can master that challenge. And I think with that, and in the interest of our time, I think we can end the session for today. I want to thank you all for your participation. Again, if you want to see the recorded session or if you want to recommend it to one of your colleagues, the recording will be available shortly after on our website. Also, special thank you to you, Carsten. It was a pleasure having that session together with you. Have a good day, everyone.
Thanks for having me.